Welcome to the next Dutch Kills Civic Association Meet the Candidates series interview. With us today is Erica Vladimer. Erica Vladimer is running for the New York 12 Congressional District at the federal level. Erica, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here.
All right, why don't you introduce yourself to our viewers so they can know who you are?
Yeah, my name is Erica Vladimer. I'm an advocate, I'm an attorney, an activist, and I am running to bring a new voice to our district and to Congress. And a big reason why I'm running is because I know firsthand how government really continues to shut out the very voices that we need at the table as we are fighting for a more compassionate, inclusive, forward-thinking society and government.
All right, outstanding. Now, the first question that we're going to put forward to you is, obviously, you must feel that you are qualified to be our federal representative.
Right.
My question to you is why? What makes you qualified for that role?
Yeah, I am the only candidate, aside from the incumbent, who is bringing legislative experience and also legislative success. On the experience side, I worked for the New York State Senate. I was an education analyst and counsel, and that allowed me to be in those negotiation rooms, working to provide, billions of dollars in funding for education for our children. Also focusing on higher education, CUNY and SUNY. And at the same time, I was also able to work with various organizations, a lot from New York City, working with them on what their legislative priorities were, making sure that our conferences' legislative priorities really reflected what was happening on the ground and the values that our advocates and activists were looking to bring to the state. In terms of legislative success, I'm a co-founder of New York State's Sexual Harassment Working Group. We are a group of former state legislative staffers who were either harassed, assaulted, or retaliated against by state elected or appointed officials. We realized that our elected officials were trying to pass workplace protections against sexual harassment without having victims at the table. And we knew that that was not going to really help us. They needed to hear from those with lived experiences. And through coalition building, we were able to put together a much more comprehensive policy proposal, and working with new, bold legislators such as Alessandra Biaggi, Julia Salazar, Yuli New, we were really able to pass what are now, the strongest laws in the nation. And that was a success because of the coalition building that we did and the fact that we demanded a seat at the table that for so long victims never really had.
Awesome. I'm going to start off with an issue that's been affecting our neighborhood for some time now. Our post office has a history of not accurately and consistently delivering the mail. It's been a problem for years. A large portion of the Dutch Kills district is our senior citizens and are completely dependent upon that service. If you were elected to represent this district, what steps would you take to address the problems that we have in our post office?
Yeah, absolutely. Post offices are a federal program. And so I think we have to realize that even though we are transitioning and we're, in this email world, this internet-based technological world, post offices can bring us more than just the mail. There's certain legislation that's been proposed in Congress that I support about creating public banks and having our post offices provide those services. And so I think when we look at other ways that we can invest in our post office, that in turn will also help strengthen the very basic, needs and also the why post offices were created in the first place. If we can put more funding and beef up and create more robust services in our post office, that in turn will help make sure that people who live in Dutch Kills have their mail.
All right, fair enough. And you actually did address, but I'm going to just jump back to it. Sure. I know one of our neighboring district's leaders has proposed legislation to expand the post office services. So my question was to you, Given the problems that we're already having in the post office, would you support that expansion? And it, like you stated, it does include offering financial services, including ATMs, paycheck cashing, bill payment, and electronic money transfers. You endorse that idea. You think that's a good idea?
I do think it's a good idea, but I do think that we have to do it in a careful way. It's one thing to mandate that the post office provide these services. It's another thing for the federal government to say, we want our post offices to provide these services, and we are going to provide support for our post offices to provide these services. And a lot of that does come in terms of funding.
Okay, fair enough. Another issue that's been a hot button issue in our area is housing, specifically affordability of housing. Inside the New York 12 district, there are thousands of units being used exclusively or part-time in the short-term rental market in sites such as Airbnb. Do you feel that this market should be regulated, and to what extent?
It should be regulated because as I think we are seeing, not just in our district, but also across the whole city and even across the country, this is driving up prices. And people are being priced out of their homes, the neighborhoods that they grew up in. I would want to work with specific communities to talk to them about how much regulation they feel they need. I think it's important, to be able to hear from everybody. And it's not my decision to make. It's the decision of the people who are living in the district. My role is, as a Congress member, is to carry their intentions to Congress with me and advocate and fight on their behalf and what they're looking for. And so I want to make sure that everyone who wants to live in District 12 can continue to live in District 12 and are not priced out because of things like Airbnbs, like hotels that are, coming in and destroying the land.
Well, let me jump in and get just a little bit more exacting on it.
Sure.
I respect this fact that you're saying you want to reach out to your constituents. As an example, if a rent-controlled or Section 8 tenant does short-term sublet, should that tenant lose their lease?
Not right away. I think that we also have to recognize that that person is human. They're our neighbor. Why are they doing short-term leases? Are they doing it because they, right there, can't even afford what they're paying in a rent-controlled or a Section 8 housing? Are they doing it because they need to fix certain things, like there's mold growing or there's a leaky roof or the windows are really drafty and they need to get them resealed? But they don't make enough money to be able to do that, and they're not getting those things fixed. And so they're trying to bring in some different income to be able to fix those. So I think there are certain steps that we can take before we decide that someone loses their lease. But ultimately, yeah, it's definitely, we need a better system to make sure that something like a rent-controlled apartment, Section 8, is going to those who truly need it.
Now let's move off from the individual renter, but let's talk about fair market value apartment building owners. Should those apartment building owners face penalties for reserving their units for short-term rentals?
It depends on what kind of market we're in. So if it's something where there are no regulations, then we're not going to be able to hold them accountable. But if we do have regulations, which we do now, and they are going against those or going against the laws of the city, then yes, they do need to be held accountable.
Fair enough. What about single-family homeowners who are using their properties for short-term rentals? Should they be regulated?
It shouldn't be regulated if they own their home. I would never want to tell someone what to do with their own home. But at the same time, if that in and of itself is then going to drive up the prices and the values of the neighborhood in a way that's going to impact other people and price them out, or not allow people to come in and build their lives here, then yeah, it should be regulated.
Okay, I'm now going to go to funding, which has been a large issue across the country. And I'm going to ask you about the sources of funding in your campaign. Is your campaign funded solely by small dollar donations from individuals, or do you take money from elsewhere?
I do not take money from elsewhere. I am not taking corporate PAC money. I am not taking fossil fuel money or any type of company that invests in fossil fuels, such as BlackRock, which is the world's largest asset management company, and their main investments are in coal, oil, gas, fossil fuels, essentially. I'm not taking from big real estate or from major lobbyists.
Okay, so let's just tick through so we have the answers on the record.
Sure.
Has your campaign received any funding from the Democratic Party at the local, district, state, or national level?
No.
Has your campaign received any funding or support from a connected PAC, like from the American Bankers Association or the Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Union?
No.
Has your campaign received any funding or support from a leadership PAC, like the Majority Committee PAC or America PAC?
No.
Has your campaign received any support or endorsements from a super PAC, like from Congressional Leadership Fund or the American Bridge for the 21st Century?
No.
Okay. What position do you take on the funding of elections in our government?
We need to get big money out of politics. We need campaign finance reform. We need a public campaign financing program. I think New York City, as the progressive city of our country, can really lead the way and be a model with our 8-to-1 matching system. And I think that will allow people to have more of a voice at the ballot box, and also just feel more invested. I think a lot of people recognize that special interest plays a really big role in our government and in the way that our elected officials are legislating. When we get that kind of money out of politics, people are going to feel more invested because they know that their dollars are going to count more, but B, their voices are going to count more.
Besides public financing, are there any other policy issues with regards to political funding that you would take if you were put into Congress?
I would certainly fight against super PACs. I think, and then for PACs, I think we need to have as much transparency as possible. I do believe that a public campaign finance program needs to be mandatory. It shouldn't be one of those things where it's optional, because then it's an uneven playing field. I do think that we need to make sure that it's just as transparent as possible. And so everyone recognizes that where their candidates or elected officials are getting their funding from, so then they know who they're beholden to.
Okay, as you probably know, Amazon recently was considering moving to the Long Island City portion of Queens for their headquarters. They chose not to do so. It's very, very close to right here, the Dutch Kills section. Did you support Amazon's move to the area?
No, I did
Why
not.
not?
Because it was yet another backroom deal that we just see continue to happen time and time again, with people who are sitting in their perches of power, thinking that they can make decisions on our behalf without including the actual community. And for our governor, our mayor, our current Congress member to take Amazon at their word for things such as these made up 25,000 jobs, and providing them tax breaks based on that, knowing fully well that Amazon doesn't need those tax breaks, that's insulting. Amazon did not allow the community to come to the table. And when Amazon decided to pull out of the deal, it was when we were trying to find a new way for the community to be at the table. And I think that says a lot about what Amazon was looking for and what they would have actually brought to the district.
Okay. Are there circumstances where federal monetary incentives for private industry are appropriate when our tax dollars should go to a company? Do you feel that that's ever something that should happen in governance?
Yes, but very carefully.
What metrics would you use?
Oh, that's a good question. Using Amazon as an example, providing them the property tax breaks was something that they didn't need. Amazon paid $0 in federal taxes this past year. And so looking at a company like Amazon, knowing that they are able to take advantage of such loopholes, they don't need any more tax incentive. I think another thing is how they treat their workforce, the people who actually make the company run. Again, looking at Amazon and their warehouses, and we see what's happening on Staten Island. Amazon's warehouse on Staten Island is one of the worst for the company. No company that treats their workers, their employees, as less than human and does not provide a dignified workplace deserves a tax break. And so I think it's more important for us to really look at the culture of the workplace and make sure that it's someplace that we would be proud to have here, that that we would want our neighbors to be working at, that they would have a dignified work life at whatever company would be here. And if that's not going to happen, then there's no reason to even think about some type of tax incentive.
Now on to a totally different issue.
Okay.
Should marijuana be recategorized from being a Schedule 1 drug?
Yes.
Yes. Should it be legalized? And if so, to what extent?
Yes, I do think it should be legalized. I actually put out an op-ed today about this on a website called The Progressive Good. I suffer from severe chronic debilitating endometriosis, and I know that marijuana is the only thing at times that has helped me even just be able to sit up in a chair or keep water down. I also know that as a cisgendered white woman, that I'm very privileged to be able to say that here and have other people hear that. This war on drugs for something that we know is not addictive and actually provides medical benefits has to end, because
How
we
about a
never should
single
have been
family
here
home?
in the first place. And so I do believe that we need to fully legalize marijuana on a complete federal level.
Recreational as well?
Yes.
Okay.
And we also need to make sure that we are expunging and vacating all past sentences for people who were thrown in prison and convicted of marijuana convictions. And that funding that we then get from legalizing needs to be reinvested in a really thoughtful way. So that means looking at the communities that were most impacted by this war on drugs and reinvesting in those communities, providing the opportunities for minority and women business enterprises to have a first opportunity to get into the legalized marijuana industry.
Well, now going back to the actual legalization.
Sure.
Would there be an age limit imposed?
Yeah, I definitely believe there should be an age limit, just like we have an age limit for cigarettes and we have an age limit for drinking. There should be.
Okay. What changes would you make to the federal drug policy if you were given carte blanche to change it?
Oh my gosh, could you imagine having carte blanche? So again, I think we need to deschedule marijuana. And I also think that our federal drug policy really needs to, have more funding when it comes to studying drugs, looking for specific benefits, looking at the drugs that the FDA might be studying, making sure that the pharmaceutical industry is not playing a role in that, but that it's the health of us and our neighbors that are really centered. But when it really comes to actual, illegal drugs, our federal government should be investing instead of in the criminalizing aspect, into the services. Let's stop as a government holding people back and punishing them, and more finding ways that we can actually lift up our neighbors. So providing services to people who do become addicted to drugs, helping them reintegrate into their neighborhood, their community, or if they choose to find a new neighborhood and community, helping them build a home and have a dignified life, and that they are no longer dependent on drugs.
Okay. Stop and frisk and broken windows. Policing, it's been a very highly polarizing and contentious issue in this community, amongst New Yorkers in general. The evidence points to these programs disproportionately targeting lower income minorities. However, many claim that banning their use undercuts the NYPD's ability to effectively police and ensure the safety of our communities. My question to you is, what measures would you advocate to ensure community safety while protecting the civil rights and liberties of our most vulnerable citizens?
Yeah, thank you for this question, because I think it gets to a broader initiative, in a sense, that I would really like to bring as an elected official, which is, again, redefining what it means to be a compassionate, inclusive, forward-thinking society. And that means looking at institutions such as our police force and evaluating whether or not the way that they have been conducting their practices, their responsibilities in our community is most effective. And right now, our police force is more about criminalizing people, especially Black and brown people, especially young Black and brown boys. Let's redefine what our police force is. When it comes to safety, why is it arresting people and profiling? Why is it not actually working with the members of our community? Why is it not being community-based members, providing services to people? This was something that Tiffany Caban had talked about a lot on her campaign. And I really love the way she framed this, is the statistics that we look at to decide whether or not our criminal justice system is effective shouldn't be the number of arrests and the number of fines and the number of guilty pleas or anything like that. It should be the number of people we actually help deter away from the criminal justice system. It's the number of people we provide services if they have a drug substance use issue.
Could you give me an example of the type of services that you would like to see the NYPD start to provide to facilitate this?
Yeah, so, right now we are seeing a significant increase in police in our subway systems. And there's this excuse that's being used of that they're trying to provide support services to people who are homeless and that they are in the subways. These police officers are not trained for this. I have witnessed this firsthand of the way that they are treating people who are homeless in the subway systems. I would like to see our police force actually trained to work with people who are homeless, be able to talk to them in a way that is respectful and provides this person who is homeless the dignity that they deserve when talking to someone in a position of power, such as a police officer. So being able to actually have a conversation with them and making sure that they know that telling them that they're going to take them to talk to somebody who can help them and then handcuffing them is not the way that we treat people with dignity and respect. And so I think it's a lot to do more with training, providing training about support and social services and making sure that our police officers are equipped with that.
Interesting. Okay. Someone in the district reaches out for help, wants the resources of the office, of your office, to mobilize and provide that help. How would you ensure that the constituents know your office can help them? Would you expand on the current system? The current system in New York 12 is that a request can only be made in person or by mail. What infrastructure would you put in place to make the resources of your office available to everyone in your district?
First of all, I would take advantage of technology and make sure that anyone can make a request online through my website, through a specific email address, and I would make sure that there are multiple people on my staff who are monitoring those portals and email addresses. I think in person is still an important access point, but I would make sure that the hours that are available for that to happen are outside work hours, because if a constituent has an issue, I can't expect them to come talk to me or my staff that I trust between the hours of 9 and 5. Because they are at their job. Even having, phone options available to leave a voicemail. We would put, specific things, asking for specific information. And also hiring people from within our specific communities that make up District 12. And so this way, everybody knows that there is someone who understands the problems they're having because they themselves may have experienced it because they are living in that neighborhood. And so I think making sure that those people are available, and so that when they're walking down the street, someone knows who they are. That it's not just someone from Erica Vladimer's office, congressional office, but it's their neighbor. Right. And making sure that the access to them is not so much as a formal way, but that this staff member has the ability to recognize problems because of conversations that they're hearing and that they are engaged in.
Okay. Right down the hill is the Ravenswood generating station. It is in New York 12. It's in the Dutch Kills neighborhood, and it is one of the top polluters in New York State. Its emissions directly affect the health of hundreds of thousands of residents. It also provides power and heat to 20% of New York City. How do you propose that we address the damage caused by those emissions? and work to prevent future health conditions from developing, while also ensuring that the city's energy needs are met?
Yeah. So I think this is twofold, and as a federal representative, I would be looking at this in a systemic way. So first and foremost, implementing the Green New Deal. So we transition to a green economy. I think that is incredibly important and long past due. Our city, our state, our country, our earth is dying around us. And our current representatives are not doing enough. And it's very easy to talk the talk. It's very hard, or it's a different thing to walk the walk. And so we need a federal representative who's going to look at the transitioning to a green economy that's going to empower the people who are working at current places that are emitting pollutants, providing them training to transition over into a green economy themselves. And we also need to look at renewable energy. We need to look at solar. We need to look at wind. We need to look at thermal and hydro.
Which comes first? Do we shut down the polluting plant first and then develop the infrastructure, the green infrastructure? Or do we develop the green infrastructure, and when we have an energy surplus, we then shut down the facility?
I don't necessarily know if it's which comes first. I think they sort of have to happen at the same time.
Okay.
Because we can't just immediately shut down a power plant. There's going to have to be a safe process in place. And so as we start developing that, we can also start transitioning in, and looking at building into green energy.
Okay.
And so I think it's sort of happening at the same time. But to go back to what you were asking about addressing the health issues of people who have already been affected, it's where Medicare for All comes in. People shouldn't be priced out of receiving the health care that they need, especially when that care is needed because of the damage inflicted by our government, by allowing, such factories and power plants to exist so close, to where people are living. For not transitioning into a green economy sooner. They deserve access to high quality healthcare, and the best way to do that is through Medicare for All.
Okay. The second environmental question that was brought forward was that New York 12 encompasses large swaths of New York City's waterfront. Mm-hmm. And much of the area is in FEMA flood evacuation zone. What ways would you assist our city and state in protecting our district from the damage caused by the next superstorm? And are you satisfied with the response and assistance FEMA has thus far provided in the emergencies that we've had in this city?
No, I'm certainly not satisfied with the way FEMA has responded, but I am also not satisfied with the way that the city and the state have used FEMA finances that have been available to them since Hurricane Sandy or Superstorm Sandy had hit. I think this really strikes at the heart of the lack of partnership that we see across our different levels of government. And I think a big part of that is because of the relationships of the elected officials themselves. They are really political relationships based on fear and vindictiveness. We need actual partners who want to work together because they know that actually working together is going to help all of their constituents and in turn the entire city. I would want to really dig into FEMA funding, look at the contracts, who they're going to. Is it these private companies, these developers who are taking their sweet time because they know that's going to drive up the price and hopefully they can suck more money out of the federal government, or maybe the state or the city's now going to have to subsidize it and that's why they're taking their sweet time? Should this be more of a public works program? And as we start, again, transitioning over into a green economy, equipping people and training them in a way to help us create a water resilience program, and allowing it to be through our government. Why not employ people through our government? The federal government is one of the largest employers in the country. Why don't we continue to do that? And why not partner with the city and state in doing that? Because the way that it's working, when a lot of this money is going to private companies at this point, not a lot's been done since Superstorm Sandy on our waterfront. And water's only going to rise, and the next Superstorm Sandy is going to hit. And the city's not prepared. And we've had enough time, and we're not working quick enough.
Okay. Do you have any specific, I know you spoke to the Green New Deal, but do you have any specific initiatives or policy changes that you would deploy to deal with the threats posed to us by our changing climate?
You know, the one thing that I really always think about is our transportation system. I remember this past summer when the grid shut down and people were trapped on subways twice because it hit over 100 degrees outside. And that is deadly. People could have died. We cannot take that risk again. And so as the MTA is investing, and I'm putting that in quotes because they have this ambitious capital plan, and God knows if we're actually going to get that funding. But for purposes of answering this question, as the MTA is investing more money into fixing the switch problems and the tracks and new rail cars, are we just putting band-aids and feeding into this current grid system that we have, or are they making sure that what they're providing will help us upgrade to a green economy and to a green transportation system? You know, when we talk about a transition to a green economy, we need to think of it as a just transition. There's a lot of transportation deserts that exist in our outer boroughs, and so as we are pushing away from single occupancy vehicles, we have to recognize that not everybody has the same access to public transportation, such as our subway system. And so looking at things like electric cars, I know VIA actually has a program that they have in Seattle and even in Berlin, where they are creating a fleet of vans that are sort of like mini buses that will pick people up at certain points and either drop them off at some place that's closer to where they can walk to work, or to a closer subway system or subway stop, but it's all electric cars. If we try and invest in something like that in the city, that can help us address the climate crisis, but also recognize that we do have transportation deserts and not everybody has access to subway stations in the way that a lot of people do in Manhattan. And that will also help us bring new jobs into the city. We're going to need people who are going to build these electric vans. We're going to need people who are going to help implement and put in charging stations. And so making sure that as we continue to transition into a green economy, it's done in a way to recognize that not everybody's going to have access to a green economy in the way that their neighbors might.
Now, everyone's favorite topic, taxes. The federal tax rate for all corporations is 21%. For individuals making $55,000, it's 22%. And the federal tax rate for individuals making $160,000 is 24%. For trading stocks, the federal tax rate is 15%. I bring you forward these details to ask you, do you think that the tax structure we currently have is effective and appropriate?
It is effective and appropriate for a corporate capitalistic society that continues to oppress people who are just trying to work and live a dignified life and progress forward. It is not effective for what we're looking for.
So what changes would you make to it?
First and foremost, corporations, their tax rates need to increase, but we also need to make sure that we're addressing the loopholes. And I am not an expert in taxes, and I am not going to pretend to be an expert in taxes. And so, you know, I would want to work not even necessarily with people from like Goldman Sachs. You know, that's a thing too. And we kind of saw this in the Obama era, where, you know, he brought in people from these major, conglomerate corporations, and those were his economic advisors. We need small business owners. I want to talk to them about what they see and how they're impacted by the fact that they are probably paying higher taxes than Amazon, that they have to pay federal taxes and Amazon paid zero after making $11 billion in profit. So I think that we need to restructure it that puts people ahead of corporations.
The current political climate has consistently seen proposed budget cuts for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, And at the same time, there's also a widespread push to see those programs expanded.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that those programs are effective and efficient? And if you were put into office, what changes would you pursue regarding them?
Some of them are effective-ish. They can be much more effective. And so if we want to just go down
Social
the
Security,
list. Okay, so
Medicare, and Medicaid.
Okay, so first of all, Medicare for all. To me, Medicare, Medicaid, it's the risk pool is too small, and so people are not getting access to the type of health care that they need and deserve. We need to get the private industry out, and make it a what it really is, which is a human right. Healthcare is a human right, and so that means our government needs to play a critical role in providing access to healthcare, into high quality healthcare. And the way that it stands right now, that people don't have that. And we're not asking people to give up their healthcare. We're asking them to give up their premiums. We're asking them to give up paying for a bureaucracy that exists with private health insurances and companies, and allowing other people to have access to the same high quality healthcare that they do. Social Security, I think we need to increase the salary that would be taxed. Right now, I think it's at 165,000.
Somewhere around there, yes.
Somewhere around
caps,
there, yeah. We need to increase that. There are people who are making $50 million a year, and they certainly did not make that money themselves.
How far would you increase it?
I honestly, I don't know. I would really, I would want to do more research and talk to people who are experts in this, and I wouldn't want to sit here and throw a number at you.
That's fair.
I've certainly thought about, and read a few things about just taking the cap off, and that is something I'm interested in. But I would really want to talk to people who have looked at this and are experts in this, and have advocated for this, for decades.
Do you personally have any policy plans in place, excluding Medicare for all and the plans you've already addressed, to ensure that the senior population of New York 12 does not face any housing or healthcare food insecurities? Do you have any policy objectives in that line that you would like to pursue if you were put in office?
Yeah, I think our senior population is incredibly vulnerable, especially here in New York City. I'm going to go back to transportation for a second. Our public transportation is not ADA compliant. I think it's only like 20% of our subway systems have elevators, and we're still building and renovating our subway stops without elevators. My mind is seriously blown by such a thing. The fact that even our library wouldn't have elevators. It's just, we have to think about our senior population in that way, that they are vulnerable. And again, our government should be an institution that is here to support and lift up people, our communities, our neighbors, not stop them from doing things. And so, transportation for, our senior population is huge. Housing, we don't want them, I don't want any senior to be priced out of where they're living because they're not living in a rent regulated apartment, and the private landlord who owns it sells it to someone else, and they increase costs by 30, 40, 50%. And then where are they going to go? When it comes to healthcare, my grandparents, both my grandpas have passed, and at the end of their life, one fell and he broke his hip, and to have to jump through so many hula hoops and figure out, who to call for what and when and how, and working within the Medicaid and the Medicare system, just to get him a bed at a rehabilitation center that we knew would not just leave him on his back, and so he would develop a bed sore. Nobody should have to go through that. Everybody deserves to, live a dignified life until their dying breath. And my grandpa didn't. He was left and had a huge infection on his toe that ultimately led to sepsis and a heart attack. and that's why he died. He didn't die because he broke his hip. He died because of the failure of our healthcare system and for it to not center our seniors.
All right, we're moving to the conclusion.
Okay.
And what I'd like to ask you now, and I'll give you a moment to think about it after, because it's a big question.
Okay.
Let's say you were to be elected. Now, you could go in, and we're going to give you carte blanche again. You're in charge. You have 3 specific policy or legal changes at the federal level the moment you walk through the door that you can enact. What are the top 3 changes you would make the moment you walked in the office, if you could?
I mean, the biggest thing that I'm thinking of is implementing the Green New Deal as legislation.
Okay.
But I also know that that's kind of multiple different policies.
That's all right. We'll let it go for now. So
Okay.
we'll say the Green New
Yeah,
Deal,
yeah.
and then what would be the other 2?
Yeah. Medicare for all is another one. You know, I have to be honest, it's a toss-up for me between campaign finance reform, so a public campaign finance system, but also, and maybe this could be part of it, term limits and extending terms. So I think, and we see this on the state level as well, the minute you get into office, the first thing you really have to think about is how you're going to win your next race. Because it's 2 years away. Us candidates, especially first-time candidates, are launching our campaigns a year before the election. And so to think about having to put at least 1 year of being an elected official into my campaign, how can you actually govern properly? So I would like to extend terms to 4 years. And I do think we need term limits.
And then put limits. Okay.
Yeah.
I do think you snuck in 4 things, but that's okay. Now, out of those, which is the most important to you?
The Green New Deal.
Green New Deal by
Yeah.
far.
Yeah.
Why?
Because if we don't implement a Green New Deal, then there won't be a society for us to make better. There's not going to be a society for us to fight for. This is not something that we can, pretend that we can keep pushing back. We have an obligation to ourselves, to our children, because, we knew about climate change in the 1980s. I was born in 1987. Wasn't really taught much about it. And now we are in a life or death situation. And it's maddening. And, when we saw the climate protest back in, was it September? I'm not even remembering now. Time just flies by so quickly. Our students are pissed off that this is the kind of world that we're leaving them. And I don't blame them, because we're also not setting them up for success to save this world. We have to. We have no choice. And there is no such thing, as Nancy Pelosi said, well, labor doesn't think we can do this in 10 years, so, we're not going to be able to do it in 10 years. No. We need to do it in 10 years. We need to do it sooner. This isn't about giving in and hemming and hawing. This is bringing everybody to the table and saying, we have a huge crisis on our hands. We need to fix it, and we're not getting up from this table until we have a solution as to how.
All right. Now I'm going to open it up to you. Is there an issue or an opportunity, something that you want to shine the spotlight on? I'm going to ask you if you have anything you would like to say to our audience regarding, something you think has been overlooked, something you think is important. Now is the time. I'm going to yield the floor to you.
I got into public service because I became an education advocate. I worked for an organization called Public Allies in Hartford, Connecticut, and I saw what happens when our students fall through the cracks. And I think our federal government has a much stronger role that it can play in the education of our children. Education is a human right, and it should be a fundamental right that I truly believe needs to be enshrined in our Constitution. And not just our state constitution, which it is, but our federal constitution. And I think we need to stop reducing our children to standardized test scores. As we continue to champion educating the whole child, that means that the one day that they come in, the 1 or 2 days that they come in and take a standardized test, should not be reflective of how well they are doing, how well their teachers are doing, how other schools, our school districts, our states are doing in educating our children. And so this 3rd grade through 8th grade ELA and math test that we see this massive opt-out movement behind, that is federally mandated. It doesn't have to be. So I think our federal government needs to invest more in educating the whole child and stop reducing them to a standardized test score.
Outstanding. Erica, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
All right. And thank you for joining us with the Dutch Kills Civic Association Meet the Candidate series. I'm Antonio Benetados. Have a good night.